Richard Wallace. I'm Chair of the Library Board of Trustees. This is our 9th consecutive year that the library hosts Candidates Night. So tonight you'll have an opportunity to hear from and ask questions of the 4 candidates running for Board of Selectmen. The election is, by the way, on May 14th. That's a week from Tuesday. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge my fellow trustees and ask them to stand, if they're not already standing. Jane Davis, Nicole Devaney, Margaret Landry, Kim Regan. Kim's out, okay. And Amy Baker. Many of you know our library director, Ryan Dunham. I'd also like to extend thanks to former trustees Jane Smith for her help in planning this event, and Betsy Rosenblum, who has graciously stepped up to moderate this evening. We're glad to have Southborough Access Media here tonight. They're recording the event, and that'll be available for viewing at southboroughAccessMedia.org. Please enjoy our refreshments, and now thank you all for attending. I'd like to turn it over to Betsy.
Thank you, Richard. Microphone isn't usually a problem for me. Good evening. My name is Betsy Rosenblum. Thank you all for coming to Candidates Night. Richard is absolutely right. This is our 9th annual Candidates Night, although we did have a debate between 2 candidates for selectmen in 2010 that got the whole thing started. We were in the front room. Many of you may have been there. It was kind of crazy. And the trustees said, we think we're on to something. Let's do this every year. And it evolved into this format, and here we are. And thank you for joining us. Ryan Donovan came on as library director, and we're lucky to have him. He has embraced this event, innovating with a new sound system, whereby we can actually hear what people are saying at Candidates Night. And it makes the event a little more meaningful when you can hear what people are saying. So thank you, Ryan, for everything you do to make this event a success. It is a pleasure working with you every year. I would also like to acknowledge Jane Smith, who's been here from the beginning, but is not here tonight, having moved to Vermont. But she helped us with this year's event, and we plan to include her every year, whether she wants us to or not. So Jane, we know you will be watching this on SAM, so thank you for your support of the library and this event, and we miss you. I would also like to take a moment with all of you to remember a very good friend of the Southborough Library, our former town moderator, John Wilson. John volunteered as moderator for this event for many years. Sadly, he passed away in February. John's wife, Sheila, and son, Tom, are with us this evening. Thank you. So nice to see you. Thank you for sharing John with us for these many years and for your support of the Southborough Library. And if you would join me for a moment of silence in honor and to remember John Wilson. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the purpose of this program is to educate the voters for the annual town election. As Richard said, town election is Tuesday, May 14th. Voting for all precincts is in the Trottier Middle School Gymnasium. Polls are open from 6:30 to 8 p.m. That's 6:30 a.m. till 8 p.m. Voter registration has passed, but the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot has not. You have until noon on March 13th. If you have any questions, May 13th. So if you have any questions, talk to the town clerk. I didn't see him here tonight, but we usually, oh, lucky him. Okay, program format. I'm first going to introduce the candidates in the uncontested races. If you're running in a race, uncontested, please stand when your name is called. Then we will hear from our candidates for the Board of Selectmen. Each candidate will be invited to give an introductory statement in the order their names appear on the ballot, which is also alphabetical. Then we'll have public Q&A. If everybody's had a chance to ask all the questions out there, the candidates may ask questions of each other. Then we'll finish up with closing statements by the selectmen. We ask that if you ask a question, you can do a follow-up question, but please go to the back of the line and let everybody have a chance to ask a question before you come back with another question. All right, time limits. Candidates, your introductory and closing statements should be 3 minutes or less. Thank you. Your responses to questions, 2 minutes or less. Thank you. Those times are on the table, should be. And as I said, you may question each other at the conclusion of the public questioning. Audience, anyone may ask a question of the candidates. If you want to ask a question, please step forward to the microphone. Appears to be in the back of the room between the aisles. Please state your name and address, just like we do at town meeting. There's a time limit of 1 minute to ask a question. My personal feeling is if you need to go over a minute, you're making a speech and you should think about running for office next year. Feel free to ask a follow-up if you feel that that is required related to your original question. Please keep that to 1 minute as well. Thanks. Our timer this evening is Nicole DeBonnet in the back of the room. Thank you, Ms. DeBonnet. Candidates, she's going to give you a sign when you have 20 seconds left in your responses. She will ring a bell when your time is up. Please be considerate, and I am not looking at any particular person when I say this. Stop talking when the bell goes off. Time limits are strictly enforced in fairness to everyone. Since we only have one race this year, it may be possible to go back to topics, so if for any reason you are cut off through time and you want to revisit a topic, just make a little note, and when everybody's had their say, if there's time, we'll go back to your topic. Thank you. Any questions from the candidates about the format? Okay, so let's get started by introducing candidates present tonight for uncontested races. And I didn't have too many RSVPs in this category, so I'm just going to read the names. And if you're here, please stand up. For Board of Assessors, Jeffrey Klein. Commissioner of Trust Funds, Sue Delarda Wood told us she couldn't be here this evening. Nicholas McCoy. For the Board of Health, Timothy James Fish. For the Board of Health, Mary Lou Woodford. Board of Selectmen, we'll get to you. Housing, Nancy Morris. Library Trustees, Marguerite Landry. And Richard Wallace, you met them. Thank you. For Planning Board, Marnie Houlihan. Thank you. Regional School Committee, Daniel Kalenda. And for School Committee, Mr. Challen had RSVP that he couldn't be here this evening. So, it's now time to call up the candidates to make their statement. We'll turn it over to you. Mr. David,
thank you.
If you'd like here or there, your choice.
Come on.
Okay.
Thanks. It's not often a guy this height gets a nice podium like this, so it's a good start. First off, I wanted to thank the trustees of the library for having us this evening. Really honored to be here and to get into this race. And thank everybody for coming out tonight on a tough evening with the weather and the Bruins playing. And mostly I wanted to thank Marty, Joe, and Sam. We've had some nice conversations earlier this evening. And I think anybody who steps in, and many of you have, who step into this arena deserve a lot of credit for putting yourself out there. So I'm going to do a couple of things here in my 3 minutes. First off, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I want to tell you a little bit about 4 areas of focus that I'm going to bring to the Board of Selectmen if elected. First off, I'm a local kid. I grew up in Grafton, born and raised, so I know all about how small towns work and how the inner workings of how you make something really small grow. And if you've been to Grafton over the last 5 or 10 years, you can see how much that community has grown and flourished. I graduated from Worcester State University with a bachelor's degree in media, and my business profession is in marketing. For the last 27, 28 years, I have worked for companies like New Balance, 47 brand, Life is Good, and I currently work for Clark Shoes. As I looked around, many of you had them on, so thank you for that. Clark Shoes is a 196-year-old company based in the UK. I oversee marketing for the Americas division. So that is the US, Canada, and Latin America. It's about a $900 million division of the overall $2.5 billion organization. I manage about 16 people between 3 regions directly and a budget annually of about $20 million. I also am responsible for feeding into and balancing the P&L, the $900 million P&L for the region. So significant financial, but also marketing, innovation, PR, and media background, which I'm really excited. I think a really fresh skill set that can be brought into the Board of Selectmen. We've lived in town for 15 years. My wife Linda is in the back. She's a Boston girl, so to get her to come halfway to between Grafton and Boston was, I think, my biggest chore when we were dating. We have one son who is hopefully finishing up a lacrosse game at Algonquin right now. He is a freshman. We belong to St. Matthew's Parish, where he's also an altar server. So integrated in the community from that standpoint. Beyond that, I've been actively involved for years in coaching within the town, basketball, baseball, and lacrosse. And I've also sat on the board of directors for the lacrosse organization within the town. I want to really quickly touch on why I'm running, right? That's the reason people come up here and they say, why are you running? So I've got 20 seconds. 4 key points. I want to focus on building our community. And that doesn't just mean building buildings and roads and infrastructure. It's about building our entire community, and I hope I get a chance to talk a little bit more about that. And I've hit the bell. Sorry, run short on time. I want to be respectful.
Yeah, I know it may seem unfair, but all of the candidates got this time limit mailed to them weeks ago, so everybody's on the same footing. Before we have Mr. Healy come up, I would just ask that everyone check their cell phone and silence them, please. I forgot to ask you to do that earlier. If everyone would just silence their cell phone. Thanks very much.
All right,
I think everybody has silence.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Steve, you had to go first and remind us that the time is going to go pretty quickly.
That's quite all right.
My name is Marty Healy. I'm a candidate for selectman. I'm going to do 3 things. Number 1, quick on my background. Number 2, the experience I have in town government, in the town generally, and then a little bit about why I decided to do this. I grew up in Blackstone, just down the road. Went to college at Harvard, law school at Georgetown. Spent a couple of years in the big corporate world at a law firm out in San Francisco, and then did what I wanted to do, which was to get into public service. I spent the last 35 years or so as a prosecutor, mostly as a federal prosecutor, assistant U.S. attorney in San Francisco and Boston. And for the last 15 or so years, I run the trial unit. I'm the regional trial counsel for the SEC here in Boston, which means I'm responsible for overseeing all of the securities enforcement litigation in New England. Southborough, my wife and I got here in 1991, raised our 4 kids here, have benefited from really everything Southborough has to offer. Our kids got the benefit of a wonderful Southborough K-8 education, and then are all graduates of Algonquin. I jumped into town government. John Wilson appointed me to the personnel board back in 1992. Served 4 years on the personnel board, got elected pretty quickly, 2 years in as chair. John then appointed me to the advisory committee, where I served for give or take 10 years, and I was chair of the advisory for 7 years. So I see Kathy Cook out there, and I relish the number of years that was able to put in on advisory. Those were some interesting times for the town, and we did some terrific things. Then my kids were playing sports in high school, so I took a little bit of a hiatus and watched a lot of lacrosse games and basketball games and track meets and the like. Jumped back in about 4 years ago with the Main Street Working Group, which in about 18 months, our Main Street is going to be something to behold. And it was fun to get back into town government, and so I decided to run for selectman. Why? I'll touch on 3 things, although we'll have an opportunity to touch on an awful lot more. Number 1, there's always a tension in any city, town, between the services you want to provide people, the capital improvements you want to provide people, and with the resources you have, the tax rate. Southborough's in pretty good shape right now, but there are challenges ahead. And I think I'm well positioned with my professional background and my experience in the town to take on those challenges. Number 2, growth. When we got here, there were about 6,000 people, maybe 6,500. A decade later, we were pushing towards 10,000. So managing growth is very important. And the last thing is, I spent a lot of years prosecuting, among other things, public corruption, conflicts of interest, and the like. Open, transparent, responsive government is a number one for me, and I think that's something that I would bring to the Board of Selectmen. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. I give a big shout out to my wife and daughter, Sienna, because I know she's so happy to be here. Again, good evening. Thank you to the library for hosting this event. My family has lived here for 3 generations. A little bit about me: I joined the fire department in 1978, and I retired as fire captain in 2015. Now I work at the Massachusetts Department of Labor as a mediator solving labor disputes between municipalities and their police and fire departments. I was a member of the Southborough Community Preservation Committee for many years and served on the Housing Authority as a state appointee. Currently, I serve as chair of the Southborough Historical Commission. It's safe to say I have more public service experience than anyone else in this race, and that's something I'm very proud of. I'm running for selectman because I love what makes Southborough unique: its traditional hometown feel, its great schools, its conservation land, and its open town meeting, where every registered voter has a say, maybe sometimes too much say. Recently, however, I've noticed some problems. The transparency of our town government is not what it should be. Decisions are made without input from our boards or committees, tasked with researching the topics. As of this morning, there were 52 vacancies, 52 on vacancies on boards and committees. If volunteers felt respected and heard and their opinions valued, wouldn't more people want to participate? If elected, I will pay attention to the voters. I will take time to seek out advice from boards and committees and then put best practice on fiscal policies that make sense with consensus and compromise. Here are some things I'll work on: making sure the voters have a say in the disposition of our remaining agricultural lands, pursuing options for delayed school start times, exploring options for private-public partnership to fund a community center, using my negotiating skills to seek better pilot agreements with our largest nonprofit educational institutions. I'll work with the DCR to help clean up the fallen trees along the reservoirs and roadsides. And most importantly, I will hold regular bi-monthly office hours to directly hear and connect to the voters. Thank you again for inviting me, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts this evening.
Good evening. I'm Sam Stivers. I thank the library trustees and staff for this event and for you for participating tonight. I think this is a good thing to do and appreciate the chance to talk about why I'm running for selectman. For those of you who don't know me, I'm currently serving on the Public Works Planning Board and on the Master Plan Committee. Previously, I've been on Advisory Committee, Zoning Board, Zoning Advisory Committee, Fire Chief Screening Committee, Golf Course Master Plan Committee. So, been around for a number of years. And many of you here know me as someone who's spent significant time over the past 15 years working on a variety of town committees as a volunteer. To stay informed, I attend usually 2 or 3 of these committee meetings a week, which is a lot of meetings. Unfortunately, that's about the only way you can actually understand what's going on, because there are not a lot of easy mechanisms for doing that in the town. I think that's something we can improve on. So I therefore have a detailed understanding of what's going on across all the town departments and activities, which lets me be an effective selectman from day one. I don't think there's a startup period for me. For more information about my background, I'd refer people to my website, which is samforselectmen.com. It's still in the process of being launched, but it should be up and running fully the next day or so here, but I'd urge you to look at that. If you want more information about my background in terms of career, I've been a teacher, business strategy consultant, manager in healthcare companies for a number of years. I've actually been involved in running businesses that were larger than the town's $50 million+ budget annually, so I think I've got a good sense of business experience for those kinds of things. We have a number of challenges, as my competitors here have mentioned. Things like rising taxes, managing our ever-increasing expenditures, finding new sources of funding, maintaining the town's rural character and open spaces that so many of us are so fond of. And there's a longer list than that. I think our best chance of balancing these competing pressures and interests is if we have an effective town government, and I can make that happen, given my understanding of how the government works. With all of this going on, how does somebody select a good candidate for selectman? I'd suggest it's the same way you do when you're looking in your day-to-day life for somebody to work with you or for you. You check references, you look for recommendations from your friends and neighbors. If you look at my website, it lists over 50 individuals of our fellow residents who've served on town committees with me or watched me work over the last 15 years. These are knowledgeable, capable people who care a lot, as I do, about Southborough's future. And by endorsing me, they're saying, Sam is my choice for selectman. I'm very proud of those endorsements, and they're based on my record of working collaboratively with a wide variety of town interests to get things done. I ask you to look at that list, and again, it's on my website. As a selectman, I've got a number of things I will do. 1, I'll show up for work. 2, I'll do my homework. 3, I'll remain independent, impartial, and free of conflicts. And that's it. Thank you.
And I will adhere to all deadlines that are given. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, we'll open it up to questions. Please feel free to go to the microphone and state your name and your address, please.
Hi, good evening and thank you for coming. My name is Mary Hamaker, 3 Davis Road. For at least 5 years now, the school district has been struggling to find a way to adopt healthy school start times in alignment with the recommendations of the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's becoming clear that there are no cost options. So my question for each of you is, will you support spending additional funds on transportation, which is the elephant in the room in this issue, so that we can adopt healthy school start times for Northborough, Southborough Regional School District?
Thank you for your question.
Sure. I'm gonna go on this one.
Sure.
Sure. Thank you for your question. I think it's an important one as we look at the evolving times and the way that our lives work. I think one of the things we have to look at first and foremost is all of the parts that come into this conversation. Transportation and convenience for families, especially families who have children in different age groups, who with staggered start times might put them in a very precarious situation. If I had a young child and my wife and I need to get into the city of Boston, those considerations have to be looked at. I do think there have been a number of studies on both sides, both pro and con about this, and some weigh heavily on, well, generations before us were able to get up at those times and get on to school and get out of school. It's not only the later start time, it's how the afternoons then affect family life. So I think we need to have a deeper conversation about this, as it's come up in multiple communities, and I've read multiple points on both sides. I don't think it's just a, can we step up, and would I say today whether I would fund that? I think we have to have a further discussion on the topic. Thank you.
I mean, before you make a decision, you have to have as much input as possible from the community. That being said, I had 4 kids go through Algonquin who, until my oldest daughter got her license, would leave the house at 5:45 in the morning. That's crazy. It's crazy. For those of you who have had kids go through high school or who are kids are approaching, it's just crazy. And should the town spend more money? We're talking about how much money it is. You need to see a breakdown on that. You have to have a discussion. But it's a simple question for me. Should there be later start times, particularly for the high school students? Yes.
I agree with the later start times. However, I think that there's some trial going on in communities that surround Southborough right now. I do know that they're studying this, and it depends on the results. I don't have mixed feelings about it. I used to watch my children go out and wait for the bus to be standing there falling asleep in the rain. So I mean, it is like Marty said. It's crazy to have these early start times. You know, and a lot of this could be, when I used to tell my daughter, you need to shut that laptop off, and it's like 10 o'clock. I remember going to bed at 7 as a kid. That doesn't happen anymore. So at 10 o'clock at night, we as parents have to say, help us help you. You need sleep, and but certainly if the majority of the folks want this, then I would be in favor of funding it.
Interesting question. I certainly support the concept. I've actually followed the discussion at the school committee meetings about this. They've done a fair amount of study on it. And from a practical standpoint, that's actually not a selectman decision. The school committee is the one who decides what they're going to spend money for. So I do think that the municipal government and the school management, school committee, school administration need to work more closely together going forward. And it turns out that it is sort of a step function kind of thing, because they've got it organized now to be able to run the buses that go out for one set of runs and come back and pick up the same different kids with the same buses. If you actually make a later start time, that compresses the amount of work that you need to do, and so you have to have an entirely new set of buses to do that. So as I recall, it's something like several $100,000 to do that, which is not prohibitive, but it's a good piece of money, and it's something that's a major commitment. I think it's a good concept. I agree with my opponents here that it's not an easy thing to do on the kids or on the family life, and it'd be great if we could figure out how to do it. But again, school committee is the one who has to make that decision, and they've been struggling with that for at least the last year or so as I've been listening. Thank you.
Is there another question?
Kathy Cook. Kathy Cook, 11 Greystone Way. Is it working?
It's going into the recording, so we just have to project.
Okay. All right, Kathy Cook, 11 Greystone Way. So, Mr. David, my question is for you. I was surprised to see that you were running for Board of Selectmen. The three gentlemen that are running against you have, as you heard, quite a lot of experience in various town committees, etc. Normally, you don't start with Board of Selectmen when you get into town government. In fact, you were appointed to advisory a couple years ago and went to a couple meetings and resigned. You were appointed to the town meeting committee, and I don't think you ever attended a meeting. So just convince me that you really want to do this, and why you want to do it, and that you really will stick with it.
Sure. Fair question. Thank you for it. And let me address the two previous committees. The first one was a temporary committee to relook at the format for the annual town meeting. I joined that group, and through a circular group of emails that went around trying to coordinate the times for this group to meet, the collective group felt the only times that they felt like the group could get together was early in the morning or during the day during the week, which I had said right from the outset was not going to work with my schedule, working in Boston and traveling a significant amount of time. So I never participated in that committee. Secondly, and I will say, sometimes be careful what you ask when you ask a question. I served on the advisory board after being approached by Adrian Peters, the new chair of that board. I began to get integrated into that group and attended the first couple of meetings. And I resigned because of the behavior of certain members of that panel. The level of acrimony and disrespect that was shown to members at the table and also the chairperson was something that was just not going to work with me. I think we're about working together to get to solutions, And 3.5 hours of sitting in a meeting and listening to people go off topic, off agenda, and be quite frankly unruly towards each other while other people picked up their phones and worked on their emails, that made a strong statement for me, and that's why I resigned from the advisory board. And that's the same answer that I gave to Adrian Peters, to Town Clerk Hegarty, and to Selectman Brian Shea, who reached out to me after the fact. Thank you.
I'd like to weigh in, not on the question directed towards Mr. David, but on the value of being on town committees. My experience is, I think, important for this race because I wasn't just on town committees. I didn't just go to meetings and the like. As I said, I was appointed to the excuse me, to the personnel board, and within a couple of years was elected by the members of that board as the chair. Exactly the same thing happened on advisory. There were very senior people on advisory committee when I got there. Within my 2 years on the committee, they had elected me chair. And the reason they did is, I think, is because of the leadership abilities that they saw. The challenges that the town has coming require leadership. They require vision. They require experience is important. But look not just at has somebody been on a committee, again, they go on to meetings, what did they accomplish? What do the people on their committees think of them? And the most recent one was the Main Street Committee, where again, the folks on the committee, very prominent, intelligent, hardworking folks in town elected me the chair. And we took what was a dying project, and I'll probably talk about it a little bit tonight, again, because it's a big deal in my mind. We took a dying project, and Main Street in a year and a half is going to be gorgeous, and people are going to be proud of their Main Street in Southborough instead of driving around avoiding potholes. And so I really toss that out to you as an important reason to consider voting for me. That I just haven't served on committees, I've accomplished things on committees and important things for the town, and I want to keep doing that as a member of the Board of Selectmen.
It wasn't actually a question, but in fairness to everybody else, if the other gentleman want to say a few words to his point, I don't have a problem with that, in fairness. Mr.
I'll let the
David?
other speak first. I feel
Okay.
like I keep going first.
Mr. Headley?
Well, Mrs. Cook's right. I mean, you do have to have a little bit of experience or something that at least gives you some institutional knowledge of what Southborough's about, and boards, committees, etc. You kind of have to serve to see how government works. And when you don't serve on it, I think this is a perfect example in our bigger government now of what happens when you're not familiar with how government runs. I'm well experienced in government. I've been a part of it almost all my life. So I certainly understand the question.
I'd like to reinforce Marty's point as well. I think leadership is a critical element, and actually I spent a number of years as chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I think it's the job of the chairman to pull the group together and focus and set the agenda and keep the process moving. And I think, again, if there are issues in terms of individual performance on the committee, I think it's the chairman's job to step in and work to resolve those and make sure the committee does its job effectively.
Did you have anything you wanted to add
Sure.
to the larger point about committee work?
Sure, I think fair points about being involved in town committees. I think I bring a couple of things into this role. I think a much needed fresh perspective, innovative thinking, a proven track record of nearly 30 years in business, running marketing, innovation, media. I've turned brands around that were failing, that have gone from being a $30 million company to a $400 million company through bringing strategy and knowledge into the conversation. I cannot sit here and won't sit here and try and match committee and board appointments to my counterparts, but I will say that in this moment of time, what I'm hearing over and over again when I'm out and I'm talking to a lot of strangers in town, they're disengaged with our process. They're frustrated with stalling in our town government and on our boards, and they want fresh ideas. They want real experience and somebody who is going to bring a completely wide open point of view to the Board of Selectmen. I don't affiliate with any particular group, any individuals. I'm here to be open, transparent, and try and use my skills and my background across for-profit and non-profit to be able to help the town move forward. And I think we're at that moment in time that we need a fresh look at things. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next question.
Hi, Patricia Burns Fiore, Winter Street. Article 35 passed by an overwhelming majority of those willing to stick it out at town meeting. I have a three-part question. 1, how did you vote on Article 35? 2, do you support seeking fair monetary contributions? Sorry, I'm really nervous. Contributions from the multi-million-dollar nonprofit educational institutions to contribute to the cost of running the town services they, their faculty, and students use. See why I had somebody else speak at town meeting?
Take a deep breath. You're
Really?
doing great.
If elected, how would you work to achieve the goals of Article 35?
Did you have that directed at any
From them,
particular-
all of them.
All right, so why don't we mix it up and start at this end with Mr. Stivers.
Thank you. I voted in favor of Article 35.
Thank you.
I think there's great opportunity there. I think that we actually haven't done it in a way that obviously that has worked. I think there's a better way to do it. For those of you who don't know, that's related to pilot payments or payment in lieu of taxes for nonprofits, typically places like St. Mark's, Fay, et cetera. And it turns out that in Massachusetts there are dozens of communities that actually have written pilot agreements with educational institutions in their towns and cities. And it's not easy to do necessarily, but it's certainly possible. And the target seems to be to pay somewhere in the range of 20 to 40% of what the full price would be. So if you've got $1 million piece of property that generates taxes of $16,000 a year, roughly at the current tax rate, that the nonprofit would be expected to pay about a quarter of that, roughly $4,000. That seems to be a model that works. And so I think what you need to do is look at the towns that have done it. Andover, for example, has done a very comprehensive economic analysis that I think is much broader than the analysis we did a number of years ago when we tried it. I think you also not only work with the heads of school or heads of the institutions, but I think you work with the trustees of these institutions. And they carry a lot of weight in terms of decision making. So to me, there's opportunity there. I think you've got to be proactive, constructive, polite. You're not trying to somehow create massive pain on their part. But I think you've got to point out, here are the ways that the town contributes to the schools and the other institutions. And they certainly contribute to the town's well-being as well. And so you got to recognize there's a two-way street there. But I think there's opportunity, and I would certainly have that high on my list to pursue as a selectman.
For me, growing up in Southborough, I watched a lot of the property that used to be owned by private citizens and now owned by our educational institutions. As they purchase that property, that comes off your tax roll. Your taxes become increased. The seniors are struggling now to live on a fixed income in Southborough. Southborough is one of the most expensive towns to live in. Marty can tell you that. I think the part where, that's a joke. I think the part where we have to do something, at least with the schools, to have them pay their fair share. And I think everyone agrees with that. We're not asking them to do something that would be beyond what they should pay. So for me, it would be certainly get someone together and come up with a plan of how we're going to approach them and how they can pay their fair share. I think the analysis has been done. We know what the numbers are. That was presented for that article, and yes, I did vote for that. So we know what the numbers are. We know how much of the institutions are putting on our police, fire, and schools. So there is a balance, and we just have to find out what that balance is and work together so that they can help out the town a little bit more than what we all know. So that's where I would go with the pilot program.
So the first question is, how did I vote? For the first time since we lived in Southborough, my wife and I were not at town meeting this year. We were in the United Kingdom watching my oldest son play for the National Lacrosse Championship, which they won. So as he said, wrong country but right championship. So I wasn't there. I didn't have a chance to vote for it. Some of the baggage I bring with me is I'm a lawyer. And from a legal standpoint, I would have had a difficult time voting for that article. Not because I disagree with the thrust of it and the sort of angst about the absence of pilot payments. When I was on the advisory committee, we addressed this issue, and what we came up with, and this is boy, 12, 15 years ago. Our approach, and we pushed it. It didn't go anywhere with the then Board of Selectmen, but we wanted to try to use a velvet glove. I mean, the nonprofits have an awful lot of protection, deservedly, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But what we looked at is the various services that were being provided, not globally, not you need to make pilot payments, but particular services that were being provided, inspection services by the fire department, various police incidents where the police had to go there, and whether or not, and we felt pretty comfortable from a legal standpoint that you could break down and charge for that. Now, that's something that no town should ever have to do with nonprofits. Town gown should be a much more amicable relationship. And that is probably the first couple of minutes of my conversation with the people from St. Mark's and the Faith School. And that is that we don't have to have a fight about this because they're going to make pilot payments if and when we can convince them that it's in their best interest as a good neighbor in Southborough. A hammer I don't think is going to work. Trying to fight the battle of taking away the ability of them to buy property tax-free in Southborough, I just don't think it's going to work from a legal standpoint. But I think there are other ways to skin a cat.
Let me try talking with this one, Martin. Thank you. Thanks. I was at town meeting, and I did vote to. I abstained from voting and really tried to look at the different views that were going on that day. One, I agree, as we've said with the other, my counterparts here, is we cannot take a heavy-handed approach with our nonprofits. I've worked in nonprofit. I know intimately how the 501c3 and the nonprofit world work, and it's a different group to work with, and it can't just be a straight ahead. We're putting an agreement, we're putting a proposal. You come back and you'll pay fees in lieu of taxes. I do, however, think that as all of our expenses are increasing across our town, we do need to lean in on these institutions, get to the table, and have a conversation about what is the fair allocation across this conversation. I do think that's one. It is a hot button topic, and I think it is one that we need to address. And as all of our costs are increasing, Marty made a good point about our elderly population. We cannot keep pressuring that group to pay more and more and more while we have institutions in town that we think need to be part of our town. They're an important part of our landscape, but I do think it's fair that they need to get involved in the conversation and review their fees. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, Carl Geyer, 146 Middle Road. Since we're on the topic of taxes, I have a real wonky question for you guys. And I think everybody here, if you don't know, we are a single tax rate community mandated by the selectmen. It says that our residential, commercial, and industrial tax rate have to be the same, right? What you probably don't know is only 22% of the commercial and industrial property in the state of Massachusetts is taxed with a single tax rate, right? 78% is not. It's off, they're doing something entirely different, right? And that has a big effect on us. Because if you look at Southborough's residential tax rate, our residential tax rate is higher than the tax rate paid on 80% of the residential property in the state of Massachusetts, right? And I'm watching the sign over here. And our commercial tax rate is 75% lower than the tax rate paid on commercial property in the state of Massachusetts. So what we have is we have a high residential tax rate and a low commercial tax rate.
I'll let you ask your question if you can
Okay,
do it quickly.
just get close to the end.
Real quick.
Okay, all right.
Question.
So we have a high residential tax rate and a low commercial tax rate, right? So it's easy to say that residents are paying a premium and commercial and industrial taxpayers are getting a discount, right? So what's that costing us? Yeah, well, if we were a town with just 2 gas stations and
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Some of the baggage I bring to this is I'm a lawyer. Is there a question here?
The question is, okay, the question is, this is costing the taxpayers in Southborough resident tax this is the question, right? $3 to $7 million a year, $1,000 to $2,000 a year on top of their taxes to do this. Will you vote for a single tax rate if you become a selectman, or will you try to find a better solution?
Thank you for the question.
Who do you want to start with?
Who's feeling talkative tonight?
Tonight.
He's a lawyer.
I'm not sure if it was you who posted on my Southborough.
Yeah,
it was you. Okay. It was a wonky post, as well as a wonky question, and so I did the wonky thing, and jumped into the Mass Municipal Database, and took a look, and it's interesting. It's an interesting question. I mean, I'll give you my answer first, and the answer is no, not at this point. But now I'll give you why. No, I would not support a dual rate. Okay. There's actually a pretty good description of why not in this year's town meeting book. I'm not sure who wrote it up, but they did a nice job in a paragraph. But I looked, and there's whatever it is, 351 cities and towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and only a few more than 100 of them have a dual tax rate. And so I broke that down a little bit further. Most of the ones that have a dual tax rate, and you know, you got to be careful, lies, damn lies, and statistics, but most of them that have a dual tax rate are very different than Southborough. They are places like Lynn and Lowell. They're cities. They're cities with large commercial bases.
Andover.
Exceptions prove the rule. Andover does. Chelmsford just adopted it. My point is, there's 351. You had a chance. There's 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, and less than a third of them have dual tax rates. Most of the ones that have dual tax rates, there's a reason when you look at what the towns consist of. They are towns with large commercial bases. You start talking about Southborough and all of our neighbors, Hopkinton, Westborough, Northborough, they all have single tax rates. And I think the reason they do is because, while we might have some businesses out on Route 9, we've got a ton of small mom and pop type businesses. And a dual tax rate is going to impact them adversely. It's going to impact them adversely, and it's going to impact their consumers adversely, because it's not just shifting money around on a balance sheet. Somebody's going to pay that additional tax, and it's likely to be the consumer. So you up the tax rate in a business, either it's going to harm the business, and we've got a lot of small mom and pop businesses in Southborough that, quite frankly, I wouldn't like to see be harmed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also would vote no for a dual tax rate. Similar to what Marty said, I know several of the people in town who own small businesses, and the burden that they would incur would be damaging and would force more people out of the town. What I really want to focus on innovatively is how do we increase development, especially along Route 9, where we do have space, where we can court larger commercial partners, and they can bring considerable tax revenue into the town. That's what I want to focus on. That's what I think we're missing right now, is we've got some areas that are woefully underdeveloped, and if you look at some of our neighbors who have higher commercial tax bases, we've got to get up and be competitive with them, and not burden the small businesses who I know, as I've spoken to several of them, they're struggling now with the amount of footfall that they have in their stores. To burden them with additional taxes at this time, I think would be really unfair. Thanks.
Mr. Stivers indicated. Thank you.
To answer the question, I would not support the dual tax rate at this point, but I'm not willing to take that off the table as an option. This is actually a pretty complex issue, and I've looked at the data as well that Mr. Geyer has proposed. Evidence is not clear, to me at least, that it's either harmful or hugely beneficial. I think it depends on the circumstances. We started this year FY20 budget with a projected tax increase of 9.5%. That was a huge number. And through the good work of the town finance team, advisory committee, and others, we wound up with, I think, around 2.5% or thereabouts. And so my view is that we actually don't need to look at the other options at this point. We also heard at town meeting that the next couple of years are going to be very challenging financially, as the public safety building debt is coming on the books and the school debt is not rolling off quite as quickly as we'd hoped. And so there's going to be real pressure there, and I think we'll need to look at a variety of options, do things like increase revenues and deal with expenditures and look at different ways of taxing maybe. The small business issue here for the split tax rate, there's an exemption for small businesses that's now I think $1,000. You could raise that exemption and protect the mom and pop businesses if you decided to do that. So again, there are issues that you can deal with there. The issue for me simply is I want to preserve our options as we go forward. And now the answer is no, I don't support it. I'd like to keep that in abeyance until we see what happens in the next couple of years here.
Next question. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to give you an extra 5 seconds.
Extra 5. I too, I am not in favor of the dual tax rate. I do know that, Kyle, you've done extensive work on that, and as Sam said, if someone comes to me and says, this is why we need it, this is what will work, I'm all ears. So until that day happens, I'm a no.
I come talk to you.
You come talk to me.
I bet you will.
It was overwhelming. Okay.
Did you want to ask a follow-up question? You're entitled to do that if you want to.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure you're done.
Here it comes.
I'd rather have him go to the mic than go back and forth from the mic.
All right.
Everyone's entitled to one follow-up.
Okay. Follow-up question. This is a do you know, right? Some people reference the towns that have dual rates. There's 30% of the towns in. Do you know that the 30% that have dual rates have 78% of all the commercial industrial property in their boundaries, right? And all this talk about if we raise the rates, we're going to drive them out, it's just baloney. Because the 70% that have single rates. Do you know? Do you know? Ask them if they know that. Okay? Do you know that? Do you know that the 70% only have 22%? So trying to keep a single rate to attract industry, do you know does not work?
Yes, I know that.
3 minutes each.
Anybody have anything they want to add to the discussion before we move on to Mr. Roney's question? Mr. Roney, you have the floor.
Thank you. Kelly Roney, 2 House Court, longtime resident, multiple addresses. But anyway, every spring, I'm too tall. Can you still hear me? Every spring, the flowers bloom. Some of them are political signs. The political signs and their locations tell us some things about the people who are running. A lot of things they don't tell us. But this question is in particular for Mr. David, although I would like to extend it to everyone else. I see a lot of your signs on Route 9 properties, particularly properties that are involved in controversies currently. The White's Corner development has your signs up. And that makes me wonder how you can pursue enforcement actions against the owner who's clearly ignored the law in that case. It clearly ignored the order of conditions. And so I would like to know from everyone else what your signs say about you, and Mr. David, a response to that would be most helpful.
So, yeah, no, thank you. I think from my standpoint, one of the things I'm focusing on is community development, as I started to say in my opening remarks. Part of that community development comes with economic development. And one of the things I'm fully behind is our Economic Development Committee, who's working incredibly hard on a number of initiatives. Within that, there are several commercial properties, town builders, etc., who have approached me, and I've had in-depth conversations with them, and their need to move things forward in a thoughtful way. Now, is there baggage with that? Of course there is. Do I support every initiative that the buildings you're talking about are involved in? I certainly do not. But what I do know is that there's a lot of good work happening in that front, and being able to move forward and develop more sites in our town and get more tax revenue in here and be thoughtful in the way that we do it is what I'm really interested in doing right now. So I don't want to get into you know, who's bystepping the law. I don't think that's my position right now to go deep on. I'm focused on how we're going to move the town forward in that respect from a commercial standpoint.
So Kelly, for me and others perhaps, the question is, what do our signs say about us? Is that the question? Okay. That some people answer their phones when I call and ask to put a sign up, and other people don't. I mean, honestly, that's people are nice enough that I've met over the years, or I've met while I've been wandering around. And as I said, sometimes when I call, I answer, and others, I think they see the number and say, I don't want a sign in my yard. So the funny story I'll tell is one of the people I called, and he is David Coombs, who's supporting me, former moderator and selectman, and I asked him if I could put a sign in his yard. And he emailed me back and said, Amy, his wife, does not allow it. He said, even when I ran, I was not allowed to put my own signs in the yard. So I didn't put a sign in his yard.
I think that signs don't vote. So depending on who puts, you know, I mean, that's really up to the individual to look and see who's got signs. If they recognize the homeowner and they say, geez, that person's endorsing that candidate. And I get it, and I know that you know, some of my signs are up on mostly residential, but there are a couple commercial that they're up at. I got a call today that I ended up getting the wrong street. I had 48 and 48. The number was correct, but I had the wrong street, and I thought someone was stealing the signs. Yeah, I know. Right? Isn't that sad? So, and when I looked up the residential address, and I said, oh no. And we actually put 3 signs on this gentleman's lawn, and he took them out one at a time. And he said, I'm voting for you. But again, my wife doesn't allow signs on the lawn, and that's the 3rd one I've taken off my lawn. So I'll vote for you, but if you put another sign on my lawn, I am not voting for you.
I agree that signs don't necessarily vote, but I think that signs are a pretty good indication, and that I think, at least I found it difficult to actually get a sign on a yard from somebody who's not going to vote for me. So, on the other hand, I think one thing that my signs do say is I think I've got strong support in all parts of town. I got a lot of signs around town, and I think that in fact Marty Dave Coombs told me that as well. I've been working on them for several years. I know the Amy story, but again, it seems to me that it goes back sort of to the reference point that I made earlier. And that a lot of people are interested in who their neighbors are supporting, particularly people who see neighbors who are involved in town government, who presumably know, what's going on, who's doing a good job there, et cetera. And so I think that does have an impact. I mean, I'm not a big fan of visual clutter, and I think we've done a good job of limiting that this year. We started sort of late with the signs. But it seems to me that it's a useful device as a reference point, and so I think that's at least why I do it. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question to that question. Do you take a pledge here to take your signs down within 72 hours of the election? And I'm only half kidding.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I actually have a question that I would like to ask, and then we currently have a town administrator form of government with 5 members of the Board of Selectmen. A year or 2 before we voted this in, we voted down a strong town manager at town meeting. I'm told that some of the selectmen want to bring it back. I believe Mr. Kalenda is a supporter of this and is talking about this. Where do each of you stand on the current town administrator versus adopting a stronger town manager legislation? And if you are in favor of a town manager stronger than our current town administrator, with powers beyond our current town administrator, do you support having elected boards, such as the Library Board of Trustees, report to a town manager? Thank you. That's for everybody. Sure.
Yeah, I was actually not in favor of the town manager legislation when it came up originally. And part of the rationale, as I recall, for going from 3 to 5 selectmen was that the selectmen had a lot of work to do and needed to be involved in town government. And I think that's the case, at least for me. The selectman job is a big job. It's time demanding and you need to work hard at it. And I think you need to be involved in a lot of things relative to what's going on in the town. So I would, again, I'm strongly in favor of active, involved selectmen and less delegation to a town manager. A lot of towns who have town managers wind up having them run almost all the show, which is, I think, the intent of that kind of legislation. So I like to be involved, and I think that's a better deal for the town in terms of people who are actually paying the taxes, taking a look at what's going on and making sure that we're getting good value for it. So I would not be in favor of bringing that back to town meeting.
So I know that the Master Plan Committee, chaired by Mimi Luttrell, is working on that very issue. And I think that I am open to hear the report from the Master Plan Committee before I make any conclusion on that. However, the last time I did not support the town manager's position because of the increase in the member of the Board of Selectmen to 5. It was supposed to make it easier. But if selectmen hand the work to the town administrator rather than dealing it with, within the board, sure, it's going to make the selectmen work a little easier, but it's certainly going to increase the workload on the town administrator. So as of right now, I'm not for that, but I wait to see what the master plan produces.
I'll probably get this wrong, but I think it was Winston Churchill who said that democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. My problem with a strong town manager is that he or she is not elected. Yeah, this is we have a participant town meeting, and it's messy sometimes, but it's terrific. I mean, it's democracy in its purest form. I mean, the idea that a town that functions that way at town meeting would go to a town manager who is unaccountable. He is accountable. Yeah, you'd be accountable through the elected officials, but quite frankly, it's not the same. And I don't think the selectmen would address it the same way. In fact, you see an awful lot of I think one of the reasons that strong town managers get formulated that way in various towns and cities is because it's easy to point at the other guy. That's the town manager's issue. That's not the city council issue or the board of selectmen issue. So it's very simple for me. I think Mr. Purple's been doing a nice job. I look forward to working with him. But the buck should stop with the selectmen, not with a non-elected town manager.
I think I'm going to echo the same thing. I would not be in support of a strong town manager. I think for the reasons my counterpart said, the reason we moved from a 3-person to a 5-person board of selectmen was to cover these responsibilities in a wider scale. And I agree with what Marty said on the fact that the town manager is not an elected official. It's somebody who the buck has to stop somewhere, and I just don't think that's the right setup. Now, as we move forward, as the town grows, and maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're sitting here looking at 30% more population, I do think we have to keep the conversation on the table and look forward to seeing the results of the master plan report.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up? Sure.
Yeah, I'm actually on the master plan committee, and that's not on the agenda for the master plan committee, in fact. So it may turn out to be, but at least currently that's not one of the things that the committee is considering. So if somebody wants that, they ought to talk with Mimi to get that on the agenda for discussion. But
thank you for that clarification. Thank you, gentlemen. Next question. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Good evening. Julie Connolly, 26 Oak Hill Road. I'm also the current chair of the Economic Development Committee. For about the last year and a half, the Economic Development Committee has been working on what we've dubbed the Downtown Initiative. And we put out a survey a year and a half ago and found that there was overwhelming support in the town for things like small restaurants, small-scale retail, and small-scale mixed-use development right here in the downtown. Since then, we've been digging deeper into it, and we know that we face some challenges We're working with the planning board on zoning issues. We know we have some infrastructure and septic issues, challenges, but we're full steam ahead. What I'm looking for from the gentleman tonight is for each of you to let me know your position on making improvements to downtown, and whether the Board of Selectmen, as a board member, whether you would support us, and including supporting potentially, if necessary, funding that might have to come along with it, or different changes in the town, zoning bylaws and things like that, that would have to be put in place in order to make the changes that we're looking to make. Thank you.
We'll start at this end this time.
Yeah, the answer is yes, I support that. And as you know, Julie, I've been attending a lot of EDC meetings. To me, the issue is exactly that. The zoning bylaw is not actually consistent since it's now 1984 or something created, so it's like 35 years out of date in a lot of ways. The building that's been proposed for the former gas station location, the railroad tracks there on Main Street, is a mixed-use building and has 4 offices on the first floor and 4 apartments on the second floor, although in order to get it approved by the zoning board, we call them hotel spaces, which is crazy because apartments aren't allowed. But I think the concept of mixed use is a useful one. It's something that has been used in other settings to provide more vitality, diversity in downtown type areas. And I would certainly support, and as you know, Julie, I've made some suggestions from my experience on the zoning board in terms of how you can do that. And I think the Master Plan Committee is certainly considering that as well. And I would certainly support zoning bylaw change to encourage that kind of development there. The money issue is an open book. I'm reluctant to say I'm going to support X $1,000 or whatever for it, but I think that it's something that we need to work on, invest in, and bring people back to the downtown area.
Thank you for the question, Julie. For me, the downtown's a mess. It has been a mess for a number of years, and I don't mean just the buildings and sidewalks and the railroad tracks, and I don't know, everything else down there, that vacant lot. I'm neighbor to it. I live up the street, and you take your life in your hands walking down there. I've seen, over my years, there must have been 2, maybe 4 pedestrians hit in that crosswalk area. So something has to get done with the downtown area. I'm not in favor of ripping down buildings to build new buildings. So if there's some way to incorporate, I know the sewage is an issue, I know the zoning is an issue, and I'm sure that your committee or eventually with the planning board are going to work out those issues and come up with a wonderful plan to have for downtown area. It's great that the owner of the Old Morrows Market, he put in some historical photos. If anybody's been in there, it's beautiful from what it was. But as far as doing something with the downtown, it should be a priority. I think it's one of the only spots in Southborough where it needs so much work. Just even to beautify it, to fix the roads are coming, the sidewalks are coming. Now you got to have the sewerage, you got to have the a plan in place before you can do anything. So whatever I can do to help that, facilitate that, I'd be glad to. So I'm in support.
I'm going to tie back to something I said at the very beginning. One of the reasons I ran, because I do think Southborough is in pretty good shape. I mean, we've stayed here. It's a pretty nice place to live. I think it's at a critical juncture, though, and but I think we can go a lot of right ways. And I think the development of Main Street, the improvements on Main Street, fit into a bigger picture. I mean, we've got the golf course. And we've got, they're going through some challenges right now, but knock on wood, that's going to be a town-owned golf course, and it's a resource that we're going to be really to tie to Main Street. Main Street is going to be in a different place very shortly. I mean, the events that happened last year with the food trucks were terrific. I mean, we're not Hudson, we're not as big as Hudson or anything like that, but geez, I didn't believe him when my wife went up to dinner in Hudson and described what it was like up there. I didn't believe her. I mean, it doesn't take much to change for the positive. And I think from a you know, if you don't manage development, development manages you. And, you know, get in control of Main Street, get in control of passive recreation. I mean, I heard folks on the Trails Committee talking about ways to connect the trails and open space to the downtown. I mean, this is potentially a very, very exciting time for Southborough with Main Street as a good anchor, not a bad anchor. And I think what's going to be required to accomplish that is some vision, some energy, some commitment, and some leadership. And again, I'll say, I'm offering myself to provide that.
Hi, Julie. Thanks. I concur with my counterparts up here. Economic development is the community's development, and I agree. It's not just Main Street. I think that's a piece of it, and that's when I talk about thoughtful, strategic development of the town. That's a piece of it, and I think the Main Street project is going to be the gateway that opens this up for the town. I had a very interesting comment that has stuck with me over the last few weeks from somebody in town who said, the only people that come to Southborough are people who live in Southborough. And then they take their appetites and their wallets and everything else, and they go to Ashland, and they go to Hopkinton, and they go down Route 20 to Sudbury. Okay? I think we're at a pivotal moment, and that's why I feel so strongly about where my background lines into from a business development standpoint, from an entrepreneurial standpoint. I work with developers constantly in my daily work life. From a retail standpoint, I know the ins and outs of what pop-up retail looks like. I can take concepts like we did with a food truck, and whether we develop a pop-up beer garden. There's a flow of programming from a seasonal standpoint that we can bring to the town that's sorely lacking right now. And it goes beyond just the Main Street project. It's about building this community, okay? The community as a whole is not thriving to our younger families. I've spoken to dozens of them over the past month, and the community is not thriving with that group. They're disengaged, they're not voting, they're taking their dollars elsewhere, and yet they love this town and they want to stay in this town. But there's not enough amenities to help us get there. And I think that's the moment in time we're at right now, and I think we have to think quickly, but also strategically. So 10 years from now, we don't do what Grafton did, and I grew up in Grafton, where they said, hey, on 140, let's just hand everybody a building permit, and it looks just terrible. Until you get up to the Grafton Common, where they finally put a thoughtful approach to historic renovation of the buildings that were there and brought thriving businesses into that community, as well as all of the infrastructure updates with traffic. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Jeff Pete, 9 Atwood Road. So one of the things that excuse me, brought my family to Southborough about 7 years back was access to open space, natural spaces, areas to walk and see the trees and all this. I wonder if each of you have some specific examples of either things you've done or things you would like to do in terms of preserving and improving open spaces. Sure.
That's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, one, we've protected a lot of open space in the town. One of the things that's been key for me recently is I'm eager to learn more about the transition with the golf course, because I believe that the golf course, if managed properly, can be a great golf course. I'm a golfer, I love to play, and I love to use the course. I want to make sure that the town has made a rash decision here in the long-term evolution of that golf course. What I could also envision that becoming is, it's a beautiful piece of land, and that can be a hub for this community. Lots of open space, parks, but also being able to bring business and some residential into that tract of land. I think we have to be thinking that way, and I'd love to see us audit the golf course every year and then really measure it up. And if it's not performing, and if it becomes a burden to the town, I think we have to look at other means to use that, and I would love to make a portion of that continue to be protected open space.
So from an open space perspective, I mean, as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I mean, you know, the ever dwindling but ever vigilantly protected open space in Southborough is a battle. You know, you've got private property, you've got developers who are looking to make money, and there's not a whole lot of open space left. We fought, you know, the town has fought, and you know, Ray's sitting over there, some terrific battles, and we've won a lot of them. The interesting thing from an open space perspective, I guess historically, I mean, when I was on the advisory committee, one of the very smart things that Southborough did, and I was reminded tonight that my memory was wrong about the way that it happened. It ended up happening through a citizens petition. But the advisory committee, one of the things we did when it first went through town meeting and then lost at the ballot box, I mean, when the CPA was being proposed, very few towns had it in Massachusetts. And there was an awful lot of foresight here by the folks who put together the proposal here. And Southborough got in the door really quickly. And it's one of the smartest things we've ever done. But we have now some resources, and we've had them for the number of years, that allow us to consider purchasing open space, contributing with the town to purchasing open space. And that's what happened most recently with the golf course. So the nice thing is we've got a reservoir of assets that the town can leverage with to make sure that, again, the battles that are going to continue to be fought because there's money to be made, that we have the resources to do it. It's a good thing.
I've been advocating a long time for historic preservation and open space, and I think we have some of the greatest trails and open space here in Southborough, and a lot of that goes to the open space folks, Freddie Gillespie, Mimi Luttrell, that have put a lot of time and effort in the Trails Committee into preserving the lands that we have. My biggest issue is that when something 61A or a parcel comes with a dwelling on it and goes before the selectmen, and every board, committee, commission voted to save a parcel, the selectmen ignored that and never went to town meeting. And therefore, it ended up in development. They waited out the demolition delay bylaw after 9 months, and I will like to give a thank you to Brendan Holmes, because they did save the barn. The trustees went and got the barn. So the barn was dismantled, and it was made that way so it could be put back somewhere else. So I'm a strong advocate for open space, but we can't buy everything. But we certainly can buy our priority parcels. And those parcels have to be watched when they come up. And we have to act, and we have to put money aside if we're going to do more parcels than what we currently have planned. So I'm a big supporter of that, but we do have to act when they do come up. The answer from the selectmen, the first answer can't be no. The people have a right to vote for stuff like that. So that's one thing I can promise you, that I'm only one of 5, but my vote would be to put it to the voters.
Thanks. I've been a big supporter of open space over the years, but I think there's a broader issue here. I place great value on the open space we have. I think there's a great opportunity for doing more planning around this and prioritizing. I know there are priorities associated with open space parcels, but for me, the open space in town is part of a larger network of trails, walkability, and so forth. I think you've got, again, a good trails committee now putting together the pieces, connecting some disconnected pieces. I think there's a sidewalk network that you need to consider in terms of walkability. And I think that there's obviously a great barrier in town in the form of Route 9. I think we ought to think about pedestrian. You could put a couple of pedestrian overpasses on Route 9, Oak Hill and Middle Parkerville Road area. If you could actually get across the causeways on foot. If we were able to build about 4,000 linear feet of causeway pedestrian access, and I've seen those in other cities, and it's not cheap, but it's not impossible, certainly. But if you had a plan that puts that stuff together to connect the parts of town, to give people access to the open space throughout town, working with DCR, for example, which is now much more amenable to use of their space. Years ago, they wouldn't talk to anybody about setting foot on any of it. Now, I think the Trails Committee has done great work, made great progress in terms of getting access to that space. but I see sort of a higher level plan for how those pieces fit together. That might tell us some things about prioritization of parcels of open space and focus our efforts on things that we can actually accomplish in the near term. One of the frustrations I've had is that the 2008 master plan had something like 250 objectives and 125 implementation steps. And we just went through an exercise where we counted, and there's a handful of things that we've actually done in the last 10 years. So I think we need to get prioritization, focus, and make progress.
Thank you. It's about 8:20. We have time for one or two more questions, and then we'll have the closing statement. I know many of you would like to stay here for another hour, but the library closes for 2 hours.
Good evening. My name is David Parry. I live at 22 Main Street. Thank you all for running. I want to ask you about your view on Park Central, which, as I understand it, if it's built, will be by far the largest project in the town's history. So what is your personal view on what has happened, what should happen, and what the role, if any, of the Board of Selectmen should be? Thank you.
Thanks.
Let's go back and forth.
Can I sell my
All
position
right, you
here?
want to start in the middle?
That's fine. It's okay.
Let's start in the middle. We haven't started in the middle. I guess it would be fair to start. You're absolutely right. You'll find a few words to say.
I'll find a few words
All
to
right.
say. I've obviously followed this for years. As a former member of the zoning board and chair of the zoning board, I've been interested in the permitting process on this. I don't necessarily think it makes a lot of sense or is very helpful to look back. I mean, I think any of us could find problems with how we got to where we are. I think we got to deal with where we are today. And obviously, we had an update by town council recently. I think there are 5 lawsuits outstanding on that now. Apparently, the developer has filed or is going to file a new plan with the Conservation Commission. So I don't know what's going on there, but something seems to be starting to happen. But several years ago, the Board of Selectmen voted as a last resort to manage traffic flow onto Flag Road out of that development. If they had to, they would close the end of Flag Road and limit access because the developer wanted to bring a fair hunk of the substantial traffic that comes out of there down Flag Road, which is, most of us know, is not all that safe to start with. You got school kids walking down there, families walking down there, etc. So I guess my position on it is that I certainly don't approve it. I don't support it in the form that it was most recently proposed. But you know, I'm certainly open-minded to listen to any changes to that plan coming along. But I think that the key element that has been in the forefront is public safety on Flag Road. And I think we need to do whatever we can do to preserve the level of public safety for residents out there who use that road for lots of things, walking, running, biking, etc., in addition to vehicular traffic there. So just sort of wait and see what happens and then decide what makes sense there. But for me, public safety is number one.
As well said, Sam. I think that the biggest part of Park Central was it probably should have never happened, but it did, and now we have to deal with it. So we have a couple major roads that are very small that's going to certainly have a traffic problem if it's allowed to exit onto Flag Road. So from what I gather, the state doesn't want that traffic coming out there, but yeah, I got to tell you, I've looked at a lot of roads throughout Route 9 corridor, and you see busy streets that come out on the Route 9. So I don't know specifically, maybe this is why it's tied up in courts, but obviously someone's made a decision that you can't have that traffic going out there. So I think as a selectman, I can certainly tell you that I would not allow that kind of traffic onto Flag Road. What does that mean? That means putting it somewhere else, because if the project is going through, the cars need to exit, whether that's a light on 9. Again, I'd have to really look into what the plan is and then decide what we're going to do. But certainly, for public safety reasons, all that traffic coming down Flag Road would just be a nightmare and a very, very dangerous practice. So I will certainly be on top of that.
I'd like to think, I know that I certainly fall into this category, that whoever is on the Board of Selectmen, that there are fights to be had, and those fights are going to happen, because public safety is part of it, but there's the potential to ruin some neighborhoods up there. It doesn't look, I took a look into the dockets. I mean, again, some of the baggage I bring is that I'm a lawyer. So I went in and I dug into the dockets. And by the way, I think that distinguishes me, quite frankly, from the other candidates. You know, when Bill Clinton was running for president, he said you get 2 for 1. You get for better or worse, regardless of what you think about the Clintons then or now. I'm a lawyer, and I look at things through a legal prism. And again, the first thing I did is I looked and tried to make some sense out of those lawsuits that are percolating their way through Superior Court and Land Court. And I'll tell you, it ain't easy. I think they're going to be tied up for a while. But at the end of the day, the selectmen have tools they can use to make sure that those neighborhoods are protected, to make sure that public safety is protected. And you know, the state of Massachusetts has not been particularly cooperative with this. I agree that the development probably never should have been built, but if it was going to be built, you had to take into account where the cars were going to go. And it really seems like the state didn't do that. Again, there are fights to be had, and I like to fight.
We have time for one more question.
One more answer.
I'll go quick because everybody's pretty much said
doing this.
That's okay. That's okay. It's getting late in the evening. How we got to where we are with Park Central, I think we could debate here until midnight. You know, I think a lot of things through that process could have been done better, and I think going forward, having more input and having a tighter guideline to how we move forward with projects like that, including more members of the town in those decisions, that's part of it. I definitely agree with the traffic and the public safety. I think where we are right now, the project's tied up in multiple lawsuits, but what we have to fight hard for is making sure we do the best thing we can do, working with the state, working with the towns, to make sure that the traffic flow is equitable, and more importantly, that those neighborhoods are not damaged with an increased amount of traffic flowing in bad ways. And I think a perfect example is look at development when we see these small towns emerge and the infrastructure is not put out front. It's the thing we add after the project is done. And if you've gone from Lyman Street to the Rotary in Westboro Center over the last several years, you know that it is absolute gridlock from a car standpoint. But if you've ever watched somebody try to cross the street there, when you go, and I go back and forth to Grafton quite frequently to see the family, I've had more horrifying moments in and around that Rotary where people are just not paying attention. So there's a perfect example of when you build and you don't think about infrastructure first, you pay for it for a long time after that. So I think that's where my position is on there.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Ms. Reynolds? I think this will be our last question of the evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Claire Reynolds, 104 Main Street. I have about 4 questions, but I tried to kind of combine them into something. As a voter, I'm really concerned about the direction with this town. And I consider myself a concerned voter, an educated voter. I have been on numerous committees for the last longer than I would like to say. And I'm not trying to pick anybody out in particular, but it's very clear 3 of the candidates have already been on committees and done some service. And I understand, Mr. David, that you have experience in the corporate world. I look at it that you have a really big training or education role ahead of you. I'm looking for somebody who is going to hit the ground running. I have a real concern when somebody says that they abstained from voting on a warrant article which had already been out in the warrant when it was initially produced, and then second of all, when it was discussed at the moderator's dress rehearsal for town meeting. So, having said that, especially since it's costing, that particular warrant article is costing the town $450,000 just with putting 24 kids from the private schools into our public schools. As a courtesy to you, and I'll ask the same question to everybody, what is the one thing that puts you apart from the other people? There's two people who are going to get elected. What is the one thing that makes
Tara
you...
would like us to wrap this up.
I didn't hear the bell. See, if you talk long enough.
Good one. I gotta remember that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Thanks. You go ahead.
Did you finish your question, Ms. Reynolds?
What's the one thing that is going to set you apart to get my vote?
Yeah,
Thank you for the
it's a
question.
fair question, and everybody who has asked a similar tone tonight, you're absolutely right. There's no way I'm going to sit here and talk about the affiliations and the committees I've sat on in town. What I am going to bring to the Board of Selectmen is what I think is needed more than anything right now, is somebody who's going to bring a fresh point of view, who is not affiliated with some of the deep-rooted division that's going on within the town. And as I've spoken to scores of young families, that's what's most on their mind right now, is they're tired of some of the business as usual. Now I say that with the fact that there's a tremendous amount of people who work elected and appointed on our committees who do a phenomenal job. I know that the tenor and the tone of the meetings in recent years has continued to deteriorate, and that affects the entire community. So being a member of the Board of Selectmen, I'm going to bring a fresh perspective, an incredibly strong business background, and the ability to work across different groups where others may have trenched previous backgrounds with. And that's what I want to bring to the Board of Selectmen. I think this is the time that we need that, and we need some innovation, and we need some forward thinking to get us moving. Thanks.
I have two answers to that question. Number one is that I've been the chair of at least two committees that Claire Reynolds has been on, and I have controlled her. So that's number one. Number two, and you know, it's hard for me to hide, but one of the things that folks who don't know me particularly well maybe have seen tonight is that I don't take myself particularly seriously, but I do take what I'm doing very seriously. And if folks went to a Main Street meeting or an advisory committee meeting when I was chair, they're very light, and there's laughter, and there's engagement. And it really is, you know, the Main Street Working Group is a good example. There was an awful lot of contention and controversy at the beginning of that. And it was diffused, not because we were laughing at meetings, but because people realized they could go to meetings and they could be eager participants very easily. And they weren't going to be in a situation where I'm on the board and you're in the audience. It's not the way I operate. It's not the way I operate as on the Board of Selectmen. And it's not a hypothetical, it's not a promise. I've got a track record of doing that. So what do I think distinguishes me? Meetings would be a lot more fun, but I think an awful lot would get done.
For me, it's consensus and compromise. That's what needs to happen in this town. Consensus and compromise. Without it, we're gonna be just stuck in the mud. So I hope to bring that to every board and committee that I attend and be able to listen to the voters, listen to the boards and committees, and get some action done. I have institutional knowledge. I've been here all my life. I've worked in town and retired at 37 years in the fire department. I have a pretty good understanding how things work. And my job at the state as a mediator, this is what I do. I bring people together and we make deals when we can get the lawyers out of the room. Thank you.
Everybody hates a lawyer till they need one.
Well, given that people have said a couple of things that I would say to distinguish myself, I have to come up with something new here. So I'll take off of a point that I made earlier in terms of some of the open space issues. I think one of the things we've been short on historically is longer term thinking and planning. And frankly, that's what I spent a fair hunk of my career doing. And I give you an example, the kind of thing that the Master Plan Committee, for example, is starting to do. I think you need to think out 20, 30 years and say, what should the town look like at that point in terms of infrastructure, facilities, et cetera. That's where you think about the open space stuff, walkability, connectivity there. I think you look at facilities, recreation facilities, I think, a huge demand for recreation facilities. We've got to be thinking in terms of hockey rinks, field houses, aquatic centers, et cetera. Town of Wellesley, for example, is just opening in a few months here, $25 million privately funded recreation center, 2 hockey rinks, 2 swimming pools, fitness center, indoor track, and they have a piece of land that they made available to the developer who spent $25 million putting it in there. The town gets preferential access to the space. I think that's a great kind of thing, and if you don't have a plan, those things don't fall in your lap. So, and senior center, community center as well, let's put together the plan that says, here's what we ought to look like down the road. Clearly, we can't afford that in the near term. On the other hand, if you've got the plan, you start thinking about priorities, you look for opportunities to develop in certain ways, I think you're going to have a much greater chance of actually getting some of these things done than for waiting stuff like the golf course to fall in our lap, which was a great thing, but that was a reactive decision instead of a proactive decision. So I think that's an important thing that I can bring to the process, and hopefully use that to accomplish some things that are important to people, from the small stuff like better sidewalk networks in the neighborhood to the big stuff like a big recreation center, for example.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks to everybody who had questions. I'm sorry we can't go on longer. We'll call the gentleman up again in alphabetical order, starting with that end of the table for the closing statements.
Thank you again to the trustees for having me tonight. This has been a really engaging conversation. I had some closing comments that I wanted to run through to talk more about me, but I decided I want to share an experience with you. And this will crystallize the reason why I'm running for the Board of Selectmen. About a week ago, I was in one of our businesses early on the weekend morning, standing in line. A voice from behind me, very close to me, said, "Are you the kid that's running for selectman?" So I turned around, said, "Yeah, my name's Steve David, and your name is? Nice to meet you." Arms crossed. The person said, "You have absolutely no business being in this race." Okay? I said, "Why do you think that? You've met me for 5 seconds. We've had an exchange." And I said, "I would love to sit with you, get to know you, and talk about what your concerns are." And she simply said, "Stop wasting our time and get out of this race." So the reason I'm running for Board of Selectmen is that's the attitude that is becoming more and more to the forefront of how we're trying to build this community. We can do better than that. We have to do better than that. We raise our children to have manners and to have respect and civility. And yet, more and more that I speak to people, I've sat in committee meetings, I'm seeing less and less of it. This race is not about me. I'm running to work for you. I'm running to bring a fresh, unbridled passion to the position, but I'm also not locked into any of the groups. I'm coming in, I want to listen to and learn from everybody. You're right, I do have a learning curve. I've proven that over almost 30 years. That learning curves don't bother me. There's very few things I'm intimidated by or afraid of. I want us to get back to a community that's thriving, and our community's not thriving right now. I want people in our neighboring towns to look and say, that's Southborough's doing the things we should be doing. Look at how they got that project off the ground. I want people to come to this town and spend their money and take their walks and enjoy our open spaces and fish in our areas and play golf. Those are the reasons that are important to me and to my family and why I've entered the race for the Board of Selectmen. Thanks very much for your time tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
I apologize, I've been coughing for a couple months now, it just won't go away. First, thanks to Steve, Joe, and Sam. I've just met Steve recently, but I've known Joe lives a few doors down. Our street is running for selectman. And I've known Sam for a number of years as well. I hope during the course of tonight you got some idea of the way I view government. Again, I've been in, on my professional life, I've been in the public sector for about 35 years. I grew up in a small town, so I know that people in small towns get involved. And so after my wife and I moved here, I pretty quickly got involved. And so both on the professional and the town side, I've been involved in public service for pretty much as long as I can remember. It's important stuff. You know, it's much more important what happens at the town level in a lot of respects than what happens at the state level and the federal level, because it determines what our town looks like, what kind of fields we have, what kind of trails we have, what kind of main street we have, what our taxes look like, how that impacts who's able to live in the town and who's no longer able to live in the town. Those are big deals. I think I have the experience to help the town navigate its way through some important years. And again, what I mentioned it in my earlier remarks. We really didn't talk about it tonight, and a number of folks as well as me referenced it, and that is, you know, a big part of what I prosecuted over my 35 years has been public corruption. You know, the state conflict of interest prosecutions reported to me, as did open meetings. I mean, I take this stuff seriously. And I can guarantee you, as I said, nobody likes a lawyer till you need one. You'd have one on the Board of Selectmen who takes very, very seriously open meetings and transparency and open government and responsive government. Because regardless of what decisions are made, if folks haven't really seen because of transparency and really heard from their public officials how those decisions were made and why those decisions were made, in a lot of respects it doesn't matter what the decision was, because there's not going to be the trust that people were heard and the decision was made responsibly and with all corners having been heard. That's who you're going to get with Marty Healy as a selectman, and I hope I get your vote.
I don't pretend to know all the answers, but I know this. We need a Board of Selectmen that listens to the voters, follows the advice of boards and committees, and moves forward for consensus and compromise. If elected, that's what I promise to do. I'm asking for your vote. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to visit my website, joehubley.com. and use the contact page. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A lot of good back and forth this evening. I think the issue for me in this race is the ability to actually help the town move forward in a variety of important ways. I think we've got a lot of opportunities here. I think we've got some constraints. 30, 40 years ago, there was a lot of land area. You could build lots of things in various places, et cetera. Much smaller government, much less complex, fewer state, federal regulations, and so on and so forth. I think we're running into a lot of those constraints now. We've got limited space, limited resources. Planning becomes more and more important in terms of how we actually chart our course over the next 10, 20 years or whatever. And I think we need to proactively get out in front of a lot of that stuff. I think I've got the skills to help do that. I think my record shows that I'm also a big supporter of transparency, communication, et cetera, in terms of following the law, making sure people understand what's going on. I think there are a lot of things we can do to improve communication in town. One of the reasons I wind up going to a lot of committee meetings is that's about the only way you can find out what's happening on the ground level, if you will. Southborough Access Media has done a great job of beginning to open some of that up. But again, I think we need to work with groups like the Municipal Technology Committee. There's very strong people there who I think could be very helpful in terms of finding ways to better communicate what's going on across town. More informed citizens, I think, deals with some of the issues that others here have referred to, as far as people wondering, is there something going on in the back room? So if you know what's happening, you can look in at those places more selectively depending on your interests. I think you feel more comfort and confidence in the level of quality of government that you're getting. But I think, again, for me, the big issue is let's understand where we're going, let's control that direction more, instead of letting it happen to us and, oops, we got a problem, let's figure out how to fix it. Wow, it's going to cost a lot of money, kind of thing. So I would ask for your support on May 14th. Again, the website, samforselectmen.com. And if I'm elected, I assure you that I'm going to work hard at the job. I've got the time and the skills and the motivation to do it. I love the town meeting form of government. I didn't grow up with it. Very exciting to actually feel like you have some control, which I don't on the state and federal level, as a matter of fact. So it's our money. Let's be careful with it. Thank you.
I don't know if anybody's thanked Terry yet, but thank you to Sam for recording this. And it will be, if not available for purchase, you can watch it for free. Thank you all for coming on behalf of the trustees. We really appreciate your attendance here tonight. And don't forget to get out and vote on May 14th. Thank you all.